Hello, welcome. So this is the Textile Tactile Weaving workshop today. I'm so glad you're here with me. I'm so excited to be in your homes virtually. I want to say thank you to everyone who put this together, and thank you. We're so grateful to the Abu Dhabi Early Childhood Initiative for putting this together. So I'm going to be showing you a slideshow. We're going to talk about ways you can do weaving artwork with your child. So let's get started. So my name is Laura. This is our intro to our workshop, Textile, Tactile, Weaving Together. Got some examples of weaving images here. So about me, I'm an artist and an art therapist. So I'm based in New York City in the US. It's early morning over here. I have 5 years experience with youth with disabilities, working in art museums and schools. I work a lot with families, helping them to connect and spend time together while making artwork. I've been an artist, a photographer for more than a decade, and I believe art is for everyone, and we can use art every day to connect with each other. So I hope today you will feel inspired to incorporate some art practices into your day. So today's webinar, we'll go over what we're going to look at. So first we'll go over materials you'll need and weaving basics. Just a general introduction. All the materials are things that you should have in your home. We're going to cover 2 methods of weaving with your child. We're going to watch videos so that you can see the whole process start to finish and really get an understanding of how to get started and fully complete a project. And we have a couple project ideas for you to do once you're out of the webinar and you're making art with your child. So at any time during the webinar, please ask questions. You can type in the chat box. No question is too big or small. Feel free to ask anything, any questions about adaptability or materials, really anything at all. I'm here to answer, and we'll have 20 minutes at the end to do that. So why weaving? So I think weaving is pretty special as an art form. Weaving promotes calm through repetitive movements and soothing sensory exploration. So even as an adult, I find weaving very comforting, very relaxing. People use it a lot to de-stress because you are engaging in these repetitive motions with these soft textiles. A lot of the time it's, there's different materials, but a lot of times you can choose really soft things. And the repetitive nature is very calming, and I think you'll see that when you get started. Weaving is also a traditional, ancient art form that's used to make so many things in our lives. Rugs and tapestries, baskets, clothing, beautiful artwork that we might hang on our walls. There's so many practical uses for weaving that have, it's come about as a practical art in many ways, but it's also just, it's also an art form, and it connects us to these ancient practices, to these traditional practices. Maybe members of our family did weaving. It's a very connected art form. There's a lot of history to it. So weaving also brings up feelings of connection and attachment and encourages integration. What I mean by that is weaving, when you're combining things in this way and using your hands to create this artwork, it brings up feelings of connecting and attachment because we're literally connecting and attaching these pieces together. And the use of our hands in this way really stimulates like integration in your brain and can be very powerful for us to use. So just so we kind of get an idea of what like weaving could even be, here are some artworks that I just wanted to give like an overview of like what do we even think of when we think of weaving? We might think of these really traditional art forms, these elaborate rugs, but there's so many ways that it can look. It could be a basket that's a woven object. It could be these more modern weavings, this art form by Kayla Mattis. And then, you know, another sort of modern art form at the bottom from the Weaving Hand in Brooklyn. So these are all different things, and they're all really different scales too. Like the one at the bottom is very large. It's probably like 4 or 5 feet tall. The other ones I'm not sure about the size, but just that there's a large variation in what a woven artwork even is. So when we're making our woven artworks, one of the things you need is a loom. So I just want to talk about what that is. So the loom is basically the frame that you create your weaving on. In this picture, it's the wooden piece that goes around and the string is wound on it so that you can then work on that surface. So we'll be making our own looms today. They'll be simple, and the loom in this process will be part of the artwork and something you can do with your child. So for materials, you can create a weaving with something as simple as paper. We are going to go over how to make a weaving out of only paper. You'll see that in one of the videos. So if you just have paper, scissors, paper and scissors, really, you can make a weaving with your child. But if you have other things, you can also use yarn, string, fabric scraps, ribbon. Fabric scraps could be anything. It could be little bits of felt or things that you have around your house. It could be old clothing, like an old t-shirt that you're not going to use anymore, doesn't fit or something. You could just cut strips out of it, and that could then become fabric for your weaving. So there's lots of places you can find fabric scraps. Cardboard, one of our looms will include cardboard. Scissors, you do need scissors. A ruler would be helpful. So those are our basic materials. Those are our basic materials. And now we're going to watch videos of me making some looms, making some weavings. And when we watch these videos, if you have these materials with you, you're welcome to watch. And if you're sitting there with your child and they want to get started, they want to try it out, feel free to do that. The first one, we're going to need some yarn, some cardboard, scissors, and a ruler. And so now we are going to watch video 1. Give me 1 second. Oops. So we're going to watch video 1. First, you're going to take a piece of cardboard, cut it into a rectangle or a square. This one is rather small, but you can do it at really any size. So right now I'm going to take a ruler and I'm going to mark even intervals all along one side of the cardboard. I'm doing these about 1 centimeter apart. I'm leaving 1 centimeter away from the edges, a margin at the edges. So I'm going to do the exact same thing at the bottom of my cardboard. I want to make sure that the top marks and the bottom marks line up. So I'm going to do the same measurements. Now I'm taking scissors and I'm going to cut just about 1 centimeter or so into the cardboard on those lines that I just marked. I'm going to flip it over and do the matching cuts on the other side. Again, just going in about 1 centimeter, centimeter and a half. Now I'm going to take some string, some yarn,
This is a sort of plasticky string that I'm using here. Yarn works great. It's really soft and a little bit stretchy, which is helpful when you're weaving. But so what I'm going to do is I'm going to insert this into one of the notches I just cut and then go to meet the notch at the other side. I'm going to go behind to the next notch and keep moving like this to create, that's the back, that's the front, to create this line, these lines of string across the front of my cardboard. The notches, since they're just slits, should hold your yarn or your string just by pulling it tightly through. Once you're done, cut your string. You're going to want to tie it into a knot. Secure it in some way. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tie it into a knot, and then I'm actually going to tape it down to keep it secure on the back. So this is my finished loom. And now we can use this to make our weaving. So yours should look something like this. It might be a little bigger. The distance between the strings might be bigger. It's up to you. You can play around with it a little bit. So now we need to make the pieces that we will be weaving into our loom. So I have some paper. I can use paper. So what I want to do is I want to make sure that my paper is at least as long as where I'll be weaving. So I'm kind of just eyeballing, I'm measuring it against my loom to make sure it's as long as the side of my loom. Now I'm cutting some pieces. You can use lots of different materials for this. So paper works well, but if you have some felt, some leftover fabric, some yarn or strings, these are all things that you can cut into strips and then use for your weaving. So I've got these felt colors. I'm going to cut some of these to create strips that I will weave into my loom. So again, I'm just eyeballing to make sure that my pieces will be at least as long as the side of the loom, preferably maybe a little bit longer to make it easier to work with. Felt is nice because it's really soft and it doesn't fray when you cut it. Got some orange felt. So now I'm ready to begin. I'm going to choose a strip. I'm going to start either at the bottom or the top of my weaving, but I'm going to begin under. So I've put my first strip under the string. Now I'm going to alternate under, over, under, over. So if I went under first, then I go over the next string, then I go under the next one, over the next one, under, over, until I reach the end. Still going. I'm going to pull it all the way to the edge of my weaving to secure it. Now I'm going to do the same thing with another strip. I'm going to use a paper strip now, but I'm going to start the opposite way. So my orange strip, I first went under. So with my green strip, I first go over. And then I just do the same thing, under, over, under, over. by doing it this opposite, the green and the orange opposite, it will hold them secure. Now we're going to add some blue. So I'm going to do this one the way that I did the orange one. I'm going to do it the opposite of the green one. So whichever one it's next to, you're going the opposites. So my under over pattern will begin in the opposite way that it began with the strip before. But then we're still just going under over, under over. You can practice pulling through when you're weaving. You can practice pushing, however you want to do it. And then you just keep going. You follow the patterns and you just keep adding. You can choose the colors and the materials that you're using, paper, string, fabric. You could even do this with craft materials like pipe cleaners. And if you're doing a rather small weaving, you can use scraps that you might have, even maybe fabric scraps that you might have around your house. Could even be, you know, an old t-shirt that you don't fit in anymore. You want to cut out strips from it. You can make it into a weaving. So you just keep going until your weaving is full. Make sure you go all the way to the end. And then it'll look something like this. Now you have these little ends that hang off. Those are cool. You can leave those there if you like the way that the textures look, or you could fold them over, or you could even cut them off. I'm going to cut them off just to show you how that might look. And then underneath the ends of the pieces, if you have some white glue, just some basic glue or even hot glue, you can glue the ends down just to make it extra secure. But otherwise you are finished with your cardboard and yarn weaving.
So that is one way to make a weaving. It's a pretty simple way to make a loom with cardboard, but I'm actually going to show you an even simpler way. So if you only have the next method is if you only have paper, but it's also I would say really useful for younger kids because it's simpler and it's the materials can be a little bit like wider and easier to work with. And so just to point out that last one that you just watched, I made it quite small. It's, you know, it's very little. I have it right here. It's very small, but you can expand this size a lot because it's on cardboard. It can get quite big if you wanted to. So now we're actually going to watch video 2 and learn the paper method. Yes, so if you have paper, scissors, and a ruler, you could do this right now and follow along video. So now we're going to watch video 2.
I'm going to show you how to do a simple weaving with paper. So we're going to need paper, a pencil, a ruler, and some scissors. This is a standard sized piece of paper, maybe an A4. You can use whatever you have. Construction paper, or even like a square piece of paper would work fine. So I'm going to measure even intervals on the short side of the paper. These I'm doing about 1 inch apart. You want to have thick lines, thick spaces, so that since you're working with paper, so the paper doesn't rip. So I've made these 1-inch marks on the top of the short side of the paper and the bottom. And now I'm just connecting those 1-inch marks with my ruler and my pencil, because I'm going to cut out these lines that I'm creating. I don't want to go all the way to the edge of the paper. As you can see, I'm only making these lines in the middle of the paper. I'm leaving margins on the edge. So now I have this grid, not a grid, row of lines. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut along the lines that I've drawn. To make this easier, I'm going to fold my paper in half so that the lines are on the outside so I can see them. And then I'm just going to cut from that fold up along the lines that I've already drawn. I want to be sure not to go all the way through the paper. I want to leave these connected. Your margin at the end should be about, I would say, at least 1 inch, maybe a little more. This will make it a little sturdier so your paper won't rip while you're working. So then I unfold my paper and this is what it looks like. I'm going to try and flatten it as best I can. Now this is your loom. So now we're going to find pieces of paper to weave into the loom that we just made. So right now I'm cutting out some green pieces of paper into long strips. The length of the strip, I just want to make sure it's at least as long as my paper is tall, so that when I weave, it'll go all the way from the top to the bottom. So I've got my green strips. I'm gonna look for another color. You can use as many colors as you want. You can use decorative paper if you have wrapping paper. I mean, even newspaper would work. Anything that you have that seems interesting, you just cut it into strips of really any size. Bigger strips will be easier for younger kids to work with. They will just be easier in general. And it will also, the weaving will fill up faster depending on how thin your strips are. So if you want wider strips, you'll only be able to weave a few strips in, but the smaller your strips are, the more detail and time you will be able to work on your weaving. So now I'm starting my weaving. I'm going under, over, under, over each of the papers, the strips in the loom, to create this sort of checkerboard pattern. Under, over, under, over. So I went under the pink, over the pink, under the pink, over the pink, under the pink, over the pink. Now I have another strip. I'm not going to go under the pink first. I'm going to go over it because I want to do the opposite of what I just did. So I'm still going to go under the pink strips, over the pink strips, under the pink strips, over the pink strips. But I am doing it the opposite of the way I did it with my white piece of paper. And I always want to push or pull my pieces after I've woven them through. I want to push them all the way to the edge. For me, I'm pushing them all the way to the right. But if you want to work on it the other way and push them all the way to the left, that's totally fine. But we want to try to keep, as we weave, we want to try to keep our pieces flush. We want to keep them tight so that they don't move around too much. It's easier to work that way. And since we're going over, under in opposite alternating patterns, it's going to tighten the overall weaving. It's going to create tension as we go, which is going to hold our strips in place. So this weaving is about halfway done. I'm going to keep going. As you're weaving, you're definitely welcome to, if you weave something into your loom and then you change your mind, you're welcome to pull it out, put a different color there, start over. It's not permanent until you want it to be. And for this paper weaving, I'm using pretty basic paper. It doesn't have any fancy textures. It's just colored. But if you have paper with textures, you're perfectly welcome to explore what that might feel like. It'll create a different sort of artwork, which can be really cool. I've also done this using felt instead of paper, so you can, the same way we set up our pink paper for the loom, you can do that with a piece of felt in a similar size, where you cut slits into the center of it and then you can weave into it, because felt doesn't fray, so you can use it in the same way. So now I finished this weaving. I've gotten as far as I can. There's a little space left on the end. I could put a skinny strip there if I wanted to, but it's pretty secure. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to clean up the edges so that by cutting them with the scissors, so that I can tape them down. I'm going to sort of tape a frame on the edges of my weaving. This is just going to secure it so my paper doesn't move around, it doesn't fall out. So I have this pink tape. You can use any color tape you have. This one happens to match, which is nice, but it doesn't have to. It's whatever you think looks good or whatever you have available. You could use clear tape. You could use anything. So I let the tape hang over a little bit so that I can fold it over and catch the back edges of my weaving and push it down. I'm going to do the same on the other side. Stretch my tape out, place it so half of it hangs over the edge. And then I'm going to flip it over, and in the same way, I'm going to fold it down. This tape, I'm just going on these edges to secure it, but if I wanted to, I could go all the way around the weaving and make it look more like a frame. But now it's finished. It feels like a sort of tapestry in a way. I like running my hand over it. It feels nice. And it's very secure now, so it's like its own piece of fabric, really.
Okay, so those were our two weaving methods for today. We're gonna go back to the slides. If you have any questions, don't forget you can put them in the chat box. I'm going to share my slides again. So we just, we looked at the cardboard and yarn weaving. Here's the photo in case it was a little grainy on your end. And then, oops, why isn't it letting me go? Computer's not letting me click. Let me see what's happening. Sorry, everyone. I don't know what's happening. My computer is not letting me move on from my slide. 1 second. Okay, let's try one more time and see if we can do that again. Okay, we're back. So we just looked at our two methods of weaving. So within those two methods, this is just a visual to think about different materials you might have around your house that you can utilize in your weaving, things like fabric, yarn, ribbons, interesting papers, really anything you have around. You may, if you start to look around your supplies and materials with the thought of making a weaving, you might notice interesting textures that you hadn't noticed before. So in that vein, our first project idea with those weavings is a sensory search activity. So with this project, it's about gathering the materials for your weaving, but turning that into its own process, its own fun activity. So in doing that, you would gather different materials, fabric scraps, papers, everything we talked about, get them all in one place, sit at the table or wherever. And then with your child, take turns. You could close your eyes and feel each material one at a time. So really get into the feeling of what am I touching? What does it feel like to me? So practice describing those materials to each other. Use words like smooth, rough, hard, soft. You could get more creative, fluffy, scratchy, whatever those things are eliciting for you, whatever it, first comes to mind. Just have fun being silly and talking about what the different things feel like. And then through that, you can learn what each of you likes or dislikes about the materials. I know a lot of children of all abilities can have different sensory preferences and different sensory experiences that we don't want. So, and adults as well. So talk about what you like about each of those materials or what it reminds you of. You can learn about each other in that way. And then finally, select your favorite sensory materials for use in your weaving. So after you do this sort of exploration with each other, then you get to choose your favorites. What do you like about them? Maybe this project you're not thinking about what the weaving will look like. You're thinking about what the weaving will feel like. So whatever colors it comes up with, whatever colors you end up with is less important than how it feels to you, because you're going to make this like a sensory weaving. So that's one activity you can do. And then this is our final project we're going to talk about. So you know how to do a weaving, you know how to do a paper one, you know how to do a cardboard string one. And so now we're going to talk about doing a family weaving. So with this project, you're going to gather your family together to create together. It could be, your actual family. It could be, the people that live in your home. It could be you and your children, whatever it is, whatever that means for you, whoever your family is. You're going to do this all together. So first, you're going to build your loom. You can use either of the methods that we just looked at, the paper one, the cardboard one. If you are going large, you want to make this big enough so there's room for everyone. It doesn't have to be huge, it can be small. But if maybe you have a larger family, you just want to work a little longer, you want more space, I would suggest trying to do a cardboard one, because cardboard is so sturdy that you can make it much bigger. I've worked on a bigger scale with the cardboard ones before. The paper just gets too flimsy. You can really only do the standard paper size unless you have a harder paper like cardstock or something. Then you might be able to do it a little bigger. But also, we don't always have large paper, but cardboard is maybe a little easier to come by. Maybe you just got a box, you just got a shipment, then you can actually use the cardboard from that package, cut it out and utilize it. So I would recommend cardboard if you're going large. So each family member, once you set up your loom, each family member chooses materials unique to them to weave into the loom. You could do it based on just visuals, choosing materials. You could do the sensory style where you feel the materials and choose which ones feel the best to that person. It's up to you. And then once you have, each family member has chosen their materials, you know, and have a little fun with that, then you want to weave it into your loom. So you can alternate adding to the loom. So first, mom adds to the loom, and then brother adds to the loom, and then sister adds to the loom, and so on and so forth. So you're creating sort of one at a time, but you're constructing one artwork in the end. So you weave all of your pieces into it until it's done. That might mean, depending on the size of your family and the size of your loom, it might mean that you're each weaving multiple pieces. It might mean that you each put one in, depending how you want to do it. And then when it's full, you're done. So discuss as a family where you might display your family artwork. Do you want to hang it up somewhere that everyone can see it since you've all been a part of it? Another step that you could add, really with any artwork that you make together ever, is you can come up with a title for your finished piece as a family. So what would you name this artwork that you created? If this artwork that you created as a family, if it was hanging in a gallery somewhere, what would the title say? What would it be? And what would that title say about the creators? What would that title tell us about the people that made this artwork and what they mean to each other? So by weaving together with your family in this way, you honor the things that make each family member unique, but also your individual contributions to the family and your special connection to each other. So you're starting separate, or you're bringing your separate individual selves to this one group piece. And again, I talked about earlier how weaving brings up these attachments, brings up connection. So you're honoring that connection that you have together and the way that you are one family, you are one unit, but you also are individuals within that. You are not exactly the same, even though you are connected. So it can be really nice to do this together. And, you know, you can talk through these metaphors if you want to, but I think it's also, they just happen. There's a feeling of togetherness when you do something like this as a family. So those were our projects. Those are all concrete things that you can do today with materials that you have in your house, or you can plan to do them, you know, someday soon with your family. I'm going to, with this slide, talk a little bit about what you might learn or grow when you're doing these projects. So regardless of ability, all children can practice making choices through weaving. I have worked with children before who had cerebral palsy or different physical abilities, you know, with their hands, with their bodies, with their motor skills, where they were not able to work on the weaving themselves. They weren't able to pull or push through because of just the way that their body works. But they considered themselves young artists as they were, and were able to choose the materials that went into the weaving. They were able to choose the order that the pieces went in. So even if your child has a physical disability that makes it harder to do fine motor activities, there are ways that they can still make choices, and that weaving is still theirs, even if they are not physically working on it, because they're still making the choices. You can still do the sensory experiences. You can help your child to, you know, hold up these materials, feel them on their cheek, feel them on their hands, and choose the ones that they like and want to use, and then let them, you know, select the order that they get put in, and just be the hands in that scenario while your child gets to be the artist directing you what to do. Can be fun. All children can practice recognizing patterns, combining textures, like I said, using fine motor skills for a lot of children. If you are working on either with young children or children who are just trying to practice their fine motor skills, this can be a great way to do it. You can also build your sensory vocabularies, engage with each other about what are these words that describe how things feel in the world. That can help you to grow that way. And as a family, just practice looking, listening, and feeling together while you create. So just practice engaging in this like sensory exploration, even just in gathering the materials, not even getting to the step of feeling them out and playing with them, but just looking around and thinking, what even is an art material? What even could we weave into our piece? You know, these pieces of fabrics or these little, I've used so many materials that when I start looking around for them, I suddenly realize how similar they are to fabric. Things like really thin foam that acts like fabric. I've been able to use that as a weaving. So there's all these different things that you just start to notice when you start looking with this curious eye. And then, yeah, when you're creating together, just ask your child questions, ask them what they think, ask them what looks best to them, what feels best to them when they're, you know, touching these fun fabrics and stuff. Just practice. And then, you know, engage too. Tell your kid what you like. Tell your child what you appreciate about their artwork. You know, make 2 separate weavings and look at each other's and talk about what you like about each of them. Talk about what is similar, what is different. So there's so many ways while you're creating together to just engage a little deeper and just have fun with it. So now I'm going to stop sharing my screen. We're going to do questions. If you have any questions, please submit them in the chat box. In the meantime, I'm going to answer some common questions. Let me stop sharing. Okay, so feel free to ask any questions. For my FAQ, I have, okay, so how big can or should you create when you're making a weaving? I would say it depends on how big you can go, depends on the age, the materials, and the goals that you're working towards. So younger, you kind of want to go, there's like a middle ground, but like you don't want it to be too small for little kids because they physically can't really work with it if it's too small. Bigger, wider strips, bigger loom, easier to work with for little hands. And also just for kids who are working, you know, their motor skills are not as developed. And then, you know, the older you get, you can do these smaller processes. And when I say smaller, like the size of the strips can be a lot smaller. And then, you know, the loom can get bigger, but I would do smaller strips for like older kids who want a more intricate design. And for, yeah, kids who just, if you want to, it'll take longer when you do smaller strips, you can add more to it. So yeah, and then materials, you know, focus on, like if you're working with paper, you can't go too big, it'll get too floppy. It'll just be a little bit harder to work with. And then, you know, what are the goals? Are you making a softer, do you want this to be like a soft sensory project that your child is, maybe it's like comforting, they make it and it feels really nice, it's soft, and it's just sort of like a soft thing that they can, you know, turn to when they want a little bit of like physical comfort or something, you know, they just want a little soft thing in their room, things like that. Another question is, do you take the weaving off of the loom? So a lot of weavings, you make them on the loom, and the loom is a frame. You make them on the loom and then they come off. You cut them off the loom, and then you tie off the ends, things like that. These do not come off the looms. The loom is part of the project. If you took it off, it would not have the tension that it needs to stay together. So these are just beginner processes. The loom is part of the process. I think it adds a nice like sturdiness to it. It makes this more of like a physical object, which is kind of cool. And you can like hang this up or display it however you want. But if if you make these and you get really interested in the process of weaving, there's so many other next steps and other processes that you can do at home without an investment, without a big investment. There's still more ways to keep weaving. And some of them you weave and you're able to cut the project off of the loom, and it can be its own like standalone process. There's weaving that you can do on paper plates, and all these different things. And I say this not to overwhelm you, but just to let you know that if you enjoy this, you can keep going. You can research on the internet very easily, children's weaving, kids weaving, different processes, and you can find it. And there's a lot of great organizations out there that are trying to keep weaving alive. I know locally in Brooklyn, we have the Weaving Hand, which does a lot of work with preserving indigenous weaving and teaching kids how to do these simple kinds of weavings. And you likely have something, you may have something similar near you. And you can always, go on the internet and find more stuff. So let's see, what else? We have age and ability adaptations. I've already talked a little bit about this, about the adaptations. I would just really encourage you to listen to your child's choices, whatever way that they voice those choices. Again, even if your kid can't physically weave into the weaving itself, what are the ways that they can still contribute their opinion, their preferences, their art intention, like their voice? What ways can they put their voice into the project even without touching it or without being hands-on weaving? If you can weave a little bit, then that's great because you get that sort of sensory stimulation, but you're not missing out completely. Like, it's still totally possible to work even without doing the actual weaving task. So I just want you to think about the ways that it really can be for so many different kinds of people, and there's always ways to bring everyone in, even if it doesn't seem right off the bat like it's made for that person. I do think there are ways to bring everyone into this process. So let's see, I'm trying to think of other things that might come up when you're creating in this way. I would just say, keep having fun with it. I think for some younger kids, the actual process will go really quickly. You may recognize this already with your children. When you're working with young ones, they can breeze through a process really fast. They're really creative, but it takes them 2 minutes and then they're done. They're ready to do something else. So extending your processes to include things like gathering materials and really exploring those materials, it will just extend your art making time with your child. So these are things that you can do even maybe with the other workshops that you're looking at, other art projects you're doing. How can you engage your child in the very first step of picking out some materials? And even for kids, for some kids, decision making might not be their skill set, or they might be young and it's hard to choose between too many things. So you can still invite them in on that process by giving them 2 options and saying, do you want red or blue? And just letting them have at least a little bit of say in the actual gathering portion, and then, you know, then you create, and then you think of a title, and then you think of, well, what do we do with it now? Do we hang it up? Do we put it in a book? Do we, you know, what do we do with this thing that we've created? So you can always extend projects a little bit at the front and a little bit at the back to work up to more time together, work up to more patience, more, you know, just extend that experience so that you can, you know, support your child to just work a little longer, and invite them in on more processes, invite them to make more choices. So this was my final webinar. I did 2 other ones on photography. I know that when the videos go up, you know, if you can go back and watch other videos, I would encourage you watch all the videos, not just mine. You know, this is a really great project, inviting you to create with your child and just have fun together. We're stuck a little bit, a lot of us, in quarantine. We're dealing with big feelings with the pandemic. So creating art is a great way to bring activities into your day-to-day, utilize things you have in your home, have fun with your child, and like I said, learn about each other. Just get more curious about your world, more curious about each other, more curious about what your art might look like, and just spend time together. So that's all I have for you today. I hope you take the rest of your day to, you know, spend some time together, be creative together, and just enjoy that process. You know, there's a couple more minutes if you have a last minute question, but otherwise, that is the weaving workshop.